You have a guy who objectively lived, he objectively died, and then individuals close to his inner circle claim that they see him not dead.
Right.
Again.
This is a highly unusual activity.
In this conversation, world-renowned podcast host Joe Rogan sits down with Christian Bible scholar and historian Wes Huff to ask tough, honest questions about his faith.
The conversation opens with a claim that sits at the very heart of Christianity and also at the center of modern skepticism. A real historical figure lived, was executed, and was publicly known to have died. What follows that death, however, is what transforms an ordinary historical account into a theological crisis. Those closest to him claim that death was not the end. They insist they encountered him alive again. This is not presented as poetry or metaphor, but as an event they understood to be factual. From the outset, the discussion establishes that this claim is not merely unusual, but fundamentally disruptive to how history is normally interpreted. Rather than framing this exchange as a debate between belief and disbelief, the discussion moves deliberately into the realm of historical inquiry. The question is not whether resurrection feels believable, but whether the evidence demands to be taken seriously. Wes does not attempt to persuade through emotion or appeal to personal experience. Instead, he anchors his responses in historical method, inviting scrutiny rather than avoiding it. This posture is significant because it signals that Christianity is not retreating from reason, but placing itself squarely within the standards by which ancient history is normally evaluated.
Because of this claim that they say they saw Jesus resurrected. Like there's something different that goes on there, that they're like, this is a miracle, right? Dead people don't usually rise from the dead.
So what is your personal belief when it comes to the resurrection? What do you think happened? Do you have a belief, or do you just try to interpret the text and try to see what is the message?
Well, I think, so as a historian, I do think it is a historical question. You have a guy who objectively lived, he objectively died, and then individuals close to his inner circle claim that they see him not dead.
Right.
Again.
At this moment, the conversation pauses to acknowledge what makes the resurrection claim so difficult to accept. It is not merely that the claim is ancient, but that it violates the most consistent human experience. Death is final. Miracles, by definition, are not part of ordinary expectation. This admission is important because it removes any suggestion that skepticism is irrational or hostile. The resistance to resurrection is grounded in a shared human intuition about how the world normally works. Here, the discussion draws a careful distinction between personal belief and historical judgment. Rather than answering as a preacher or apologist, Wes positions himself first as a historian. This reframing is crucial. The resurrection is not treated merely as a private spiritual conviction, but as a claim rooted in time, place, and testimony. By doing so, the conversation establishes that faith, at least in this context, is not detached from evidence, but is built upon historical claims that can be examined.
This is a highly unusual activity.
Highly unusual.
Right. So, but it's hard when you're dealing with illiterate populations, you're dealing with thousands of years of time, you're dealing with an oral tradition, and then you have us sitting here talking about it in 2024, trying to figure it at the end of 2024, trying to figure this out. Literally the end.
Yeah.
Last couple of days. It's very difficult for anybody who thinks of themselves as an intelligent person who's secular to even entertain the possibility that someone died and come back to life.
The conversation now confronts a common objection: the distance between modern readers and the ancient world. Oral culture's limited literacy and the passage of centuries can appear to weaken confidence in historical claims. Yet this concern also reveals an assumption that ancient people were incapable of preserving meaningful truth. The discussion subtly challenges that assumption by acknowledging the difficulty without conceding its conclusion. Historical distance does not automatically invalidate testimony. It requires careful evaluation, not dismissal.
And I get that. But we've already talked about the fact that we don't think that the only thing that exists is matter and motion. We as in
Right.
you and I, right?
Right.
Like we believe that there's something else going on in this world that's a little bit crazy.
There's something else.
And that to, I think, exclude that, I think excludes something that you're kind of putting blinders on for. And you do have, I mean, you're right in terms of all of these ancient conventions and the ways that things were spread around. But the Gospels are written in the lifetime of the eyewitnesses. And they're written in this period of time where you have groups of individuals who could have fact-checked those things. So,
How do you fact check someone coming back from the dead?
well,
How many people saw his body, right?
well, Paul says that 400 people saw him all at once.
400 people saw the crucifixion.
No, saw the resurrected
resurrection.
Jesus. Yeah, 1 Corinthians 15, Paul says that Jesus appeared to the disciples, and then he appeared to 400 people all at once. I mean, if we read the Gospel of Luke and the Gospel of Luke and Acts, so same author wrote these both documents, he says that Jesus was walking around teaching them for 40 days after he was resurrected from the dead. And so these are written within a time period when you have people who would have seen Jesus's ministry, who were there, say, at something like the feeding of the 5,000, who could have been able to verify or debunk some of these things that are being said. And you go from a bunch of scared guys who, because Jesus wasn't the only messianic figure who arose and claimed to be the Messiah.
Right.
There were a number of individuals both prior to and after Jesus, but they die and the movement dies with them.
This moment exposes the philosophical foundation beneath the skepticism. If reality is limited strictly to physical processes, then resurrection is impossible by definition. But if reality includes more than matter alone, the question shifts. The issue is no longer whether resurrection violates naturalism, but whether naturalism itself is a sufficient explanation for all that exists. The discussion begins to move beneath historical data and into worldview assumptions that shape how evidence is interpreted. Here, the conversation highlights a critical historical safeguard: proximity to eyewitnesses. The Gospels were not written in isolation or centuries removed from the events they describe. They emerged in a context where living witnesses could challenge or confirm the claims being made. This does not guarantee truth, but it sharply limits the possibility of unchecked myth-making. The presence of contemporaries creates a natural mechanism for accountability that must be taken seriously. The discussion now narrows in on testimony and quantity of witnesses. Resurrection is not verified the same way as ordinary events, but it is not therefore unverifiable. Paul's appeal to multiple eyewitnesses is significant, especially because his letters predate the written Gospels. These claims were circulated publicly, not hidden, and they invited verification or refutation from those still alive at the time. The boldness of such claims suggests confidence that contradiction would not succeed. The argument now shifts from isolated appearances to sustained interaction. According to Luke's account, the resurrection was not a fleeting vision or a momentary experience, but a prolonged period in which Jesus taught openly. This matters because extended contact allows for scrutiny. It leaves room for doubt, testing, and verification. The longer the interaction, the harder it becomes to explain the experience as hallucination or collective delusion.
Do you think it's possible that he didn't die? And do you think it's possible that they thought he was dead? Because that does happen. There was actually a case very recently where a guy was about to be harvested for organs. They thought he was dead, and this guy started moving again and came back to life. It's a very, very bizarre case because his family had been told that he was going to be harvested for organs. They were preparing for that. And this guy comes back.
Yeah, I mean, we know a lot about Roman crucifixion, and
Pretty
we know
brutal.
that, and we know that they did their job well.
Yeah.
And so, in fact, if you look at, say, very skeptical biblical scholars, like non-believing, atheist, agnostic Christian scholars, they will say if we can know anything about Jesus, like they'll cast a doubt on a lot of the things that we read about in the Gospels in terms of the actual historical Jesus of Nazareth. They'll say one thing we can be sure of is that he died by crucifixion under Pontius Pilate. Because we have not just multiple attested documents that we refer to as the New Testament, but Roman and Greek and Jewish writers refer to that claim afterwards and talk about the fact that you have this guy, and it's mocked within earliest Christianity. So one of our earliest, in fact, not one of, the earliest depiction of Jesus on the cross is called the Alexamenos Graphido. And it's probably from the end of the first century. And it's it depicts an individual with their arms raised in an act of worship, worshiping a man with a donkey's head who's being crucified. Whoa. And right beside it, it says Alexamenos worships his God in Greek. Whoa. And it's mocking, right? Because crucifixion was for the lowest of the low. It was for like slaves. In fact, if you were a Roman citizen, you were banned from being crucified.
Who was it that got crucified upside down?
Peter.
Why? Was it because like regular crucifixion wasn't good enough for him? Or what was he didn't deserve it because Christ had gone through it?
Well, so the story is that they say, we're going to crucify you. And he says, it's like too big of an honor to die like my Lord. And they say, well, we can fix that.
Oh, Jesus. Shut your mouth, buddy.
Listen, the Romans were pretty brutal.
Oh, yeah. Man.
But this is why we know, like it's interesting. We know a lot about crucifixion, but crucifixion was seen as so disgusting. I believe it was Cicero who said that like the word crucifixion shouldn't even be on a Roman man's lips. Wow. I mean, the word excruciating,
right.
Ex is off of in Latin, and crus, off the cross. Oh, so that's where we get that word, is because this was designed to humiliate, and it was designed to be as painful as possible. There was actually a really good article done by JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, which was done by a number of, I think it was in the 70s or the early 80s. It was done by a group of biblical scholars and then medical professionals. And so they looked at the conventions of what we do know about Roman crucifixion, and then they looked at the descriptions in the gospel to try to figure out, okay, if we could diagnose how Jesus died, how would he have died? And so they basically came up with this idea that he probably asphyxiated to death. You kind of drown in your own blood. But the chances of Jesus surviving the crucifixion, I think, are narrow to none. And the chance of him appearing 3 days later completely fine, I mean, if the first thing you do, if you survive a crucifixion and then you go and you find your disciples, the first thing you say is not, peace be with you. It's get me to a hospital.
Here, the discussion introduces a critical comparison. Jesus was not the only individual to claim messianic authority in the ancient world. Yet every similar movement collapsed once its leader was executed. What sets Christianity apart is not the claim of messiahship, but the survival and explosive growth of the movement after its founder's death. This forces the question to shift, not merely whether Jesus died, but why his death did not end the movement as it did all others. The possibility of mistaken death is raised as a modern analogy. Such cases, while rare, remind us that medical error exists, yet this analogy also highlights a contrast. Ancient executions were not dependent on machines or quick assessments. Roman crucifixion was public, prolonged, and supervised by professionals whose lives depended on certainty. The comparison unintentionally underscores how unlikely misdiagnosis would have been in this context. At this point, the discussion appeals to scholarly consensus rather than confessional belief. Even critics who reject Christian theology overwhelmingly agree on one fact: Jesus was executed by Roman crucifixion. This agreement spans ideological boundaries and rests on multiple independent sources. The crucifixion is not a disputed tradition, but one of the most secure facts in ancient history. The presence of mockery strengthens the historical case rather than weakening it. Early depictions of Jesus are not flattering inventions meant to inspire admiration. They are hostile caricatures meant to ridicule belief. This suggests that the crucifixion was not a later embarrassment added to the story, but a well-known reality that critics exploited precisely because it was undeniable. This ridicule reveals the cultural shock of Christianity. Worshipping a crucified figure was not heroic, noble, or respectable. It was absurd. No movement seeking social acceptance would invent such a foundation. The fact that early Christians persisted in proclaiming a crucified Messiah suggests they were constrained by what they believed had actually occurred. The discussion now connects theology with lived consequence. The early followers of Jesus did not merely claim belief. They embraced suffering patterned after their teacher. The The willingness to endure humiliation and death reinforces the sincerity of their convictions. People may die for ideas they believe are true, but few willingly suffer for what they know to be false. Crucifixion carried not only physical agony, but social erasure. It stripped victims of dignity and memory. This cultural revulsion makes the Christian proclamation even more striking. Rather than hiding the cross, Christianity placed it at the center of its message. Such a reversal demands explanation. Medical analysis adds further weight. Crucifixion was not symbolic punishment, but engineered death. Modern scholarship confirms that survival would have been virtually impossible. The physical realities described eliminate the notion that Jesus merely appeared dead or recovered unnoticed. This convergence of disciplines, history, medicine, and textual analysis, leads to a consistent conclusion. Death was not uncertain. It was thorough, brutal, and final. Any hypothesis that denies death must account for overwhelming, contrary evidence. This observation exposes the internal inconsistency of survival theories. A wounded, barely living man could not inspire worship or convince followers that death itself had been defeated. Whatever the disciples encountered, it was not a fragile survivor, but someone they believed had triumphed over death. This reflection reinforces the historical weight of Roman authority. Execution was not improvisation, it was procedure. The system was designed to remove doubt. Survival would have been a failure of the state itself, something Roman governance did not tolerate. Public execution removes the possibility of quiet revisionism. The death of Jesus was not hidden, localized, or obscure. It occurred in full view during a major festival, under maximum scrutiny. This public nature demands a public explanation for the movement that followed. The absence of an early counter-narrative is striking. No competing explanation emerges from contemporaries claiming the body was found alive, relocated, or preserved. Silence in this case speaks loudly.
Are we entirely certain of their measurement of days?
So this is an interesting question because of the differences between when the Gospel of John says Jesus died compared to the Synoptics, because John appears to be using the Roman convention of counting time, and the other Gospels, when they describe the timing, appear to be using the Jewish ones. And actually, if you correlate between the two, they match up pretty well. So the thing is, with Jews, any part of a day was considered a day. So 3 days and 3 nights becomes almost an idiom for any part of that day is the day. So if Jesus, and because they count evening and morning, evening to morning is the day, it's very possible that it wasn't like how we would think of 3 24-hour days, especially if he dies on Friday and wakes up on Sunday.
So that would actually make it less time than more time.
Yeah.
So it's not like he had recovery time.
Oh, no, he didn't have recovery
That's
time.
what I'm saying. That's what I'm kind of getting. It's not like it was 3 days. It was actually 3 months.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So,
no, not like that.
Then 400 people saw him afterwards.
That's the claim that Paul makes.
Paul makes this claim.
Yeah.
And how many different people have some sort of a recollection or a writing or something that's attributed to them of being witness to his resurrection?
Well, you have Peter, Paul, Jude, James, and Matthew, Mark, and Luke. The thing with Matthew, Mark, and Luke is that Matthew and John are attributed to direct disciples of Jesus. Luke and Mark are not. So they are not eyewitnesses within the Jesus community. In fact, Luke prefaces his gospel by saying that. He's right up front about this. He's like, hey, I'm not an eyewitness. Don't confuse me with an eyewitness. But he actually uses conventional writing. What's the term I'm looking for? He uses writing conventions of the day that would fit within regular biography that was written within the Roman world. So you have a guy named Quintilian who is basically, I mentioned him before, with the he's teaching people how to write. And he says that if you're going to write biography, you need to be interviewing eyewitnesses and you can't be too far away from the event to be able to write these things. And Quintilian, Lucian, and Josephus, who are all these very prominent ancient biographers and writers of history, have a lot of crossover in the way they describe how you should write history with the words that Luke uses at the beginning of his gospel, where he says, I'm interviewing eyewitnesses and I'm writing up an orderly account. And so he's saying, I'm going to use these methods that are expected as good history of my day. I'm not an eyewitness, so I'm going to try to find the people who are eyewitnesses, and I'm going to try to encapsulate this within a document that communicates what is being written.
The conversation now turns to chronology, not to escape the resurrection claim, but to refine it. Cultural differences in timekeeping explain perceived discrepancies without undermining the core event. Precision strengthens credibility rather than weakening it. Rather than contradiction, the timing reveals cultural nuance. The resurrection occurs quickly, not slowly, leaving no room for recovery theories. The compressed timeline reinforces the impossibility of natural explanation. This clarification closes the door on speculation. The resurrection claim allows no margin for gradual healing. The narrative insists on transformation, not survival. Repetition reinforces the testimony. The resurrection is not built on isolated memory, but on sustained proclamation repeated openly and consistently across communities. Named witnesses anchor belief in identifiable individuals. These are not anonymous storytellers, but known figures whose lives intersected with persecution, loss, and martyrdom. Transparency strengthens credibility. Luke does not claim what he is not. Instead, he explains his method, aligning himself with recognized historical practice. Christian texts emerge not as mythic folklore, but as disciplined historical biography, shaped by the standards of their time. Luke's method reflects this expectation precisely. He writes close to the events, consults witnesses, and orders his account carefully. This alignment places Luke firmly within respected historical tradition. His work demands evaluation alongside other ancient histories, not exclusion from them. Methodology matters. Luke does not ask for blind belief, but offers reasoned testimony grounded in investigation. The resurrection stands or falls on testimony. These texts do not claim perfection, but they consistently point to the same extraordinary conclusion. The nearness of witnesses leaves little room for legendary expansion. The claims invite challenge precisely because they are grounded in living memory. Quantity, proximity, and consistency converge. The resurrection claim does not rest on emotion, but on cumulative historical weight. Silence from early opponents is telling. No contemporary denial offers an alternative explanation grounded in evidence. Later denials arise not from historical contradiction, but philosophical discomfort. The issue shifts from evidence to worldview. These alternatives do not dispute resurrection by denying appearances, but by redefining reality itself. Their distance in time weakens their authority. They reinterpret rather than refute. These portrayals contrast sharply with earlier accounts rooted in suffering, blood, and death.
So we have an account of the resurrection. Do we have an account of the denial of the resurrection? Is there an historical record of him just dying and this, like a refutal or a rebuttal rather to what they're saying?
No, the only ones from the ancient world that deny his resurrection are groups that come on afterwards that sometimes are described as Gnostics, and they're not necessarily just denying it for the reasons we might think they were. They're denying it because they have incorporated ideas of pagan philosophy where they believe that the spiritual is good and the physical is bad. So if Jesus was crucified, let me back up. If Jesus is God, he cannot have a physical body. So they deny that he actually had a physicality to him. This is sometimes called Docetism because dokein in Greek means to seem. So these groups that we describe as the Docetics, they are denying that Jesus had a physical body. He only seemed to have a physical body. And they wrote documents later on. So the Gospel of Peter, which comes around in 2nd, 3rd, 4th centuries, is being written, and it has Jesus kind of chilling on the cross because he's not really physical because he's divine, and physical entities don't have physical bodies. So we don't actually get like a